Hello and welcome to this Unit 5 video lecture. This lecture picks up where Lecture 14 left off. So soon after Egypt and Babylon were reconquered, the Persian king Xerxes marshaled the entire military might of the vast Persian Empire for the conquest of Greece. Xerxes would personally lead this massive army into Greece. The invasion plan called for a land-sea assault on the Greek mainland, with the Persian army following a route of march that skirted the Aegean coast, first into Thrace, and then down into Macedonia, then into northern Greece, and ultimately reaching Athens and burning the city to the ground. Herodotus makes it clear that punishing the Athenians was only the initial goal of the invasion, and that Xerxes' advisor Mardonius, who you may remember was the lead instigator for the invasion, Mardonius consistently advised Xerxes to conquer all of Greece and make it a province of the Persian Empire. Now, Herodotus provides a detailed summary of the massive Persian mobilization effort, but modern historians believe that where Herodotus talks about 2 million Persian ground troops being involved in this invasion, we can probably scale that back by a factor of 10 for the land force, where we see perhaps 250,000 warriors, which is still the largest land force that anybody had ever seen up to that point. Indeed, Herodotus says that this army was larger than any other ever raised in any war, and that it drank rivers dry. And of course, shadowing this land force was going to be a massive Persian fleet, numbering more than 700 ships, that would neutralize any naval force that the Greeks would be able to muster, thus preventing the Greeks from landing any forces behind the Persian army's route of march. So Herodotus' account of this invasion of Greece is interspersed with illustrations of the megalomania of Xerxes' character and his arrogant behavior. Now, in this case, we probably detect the influence of the genre of Greek tragedy, which was very popular at the time when Herodotus was writing. And for those of you guys familiar with that genre, the idea was often to paint the protagonist as having some sort of flaw that would perhaps lead to some trouble, a downfall. And here, Xerxes fits that model perfectly. Now, Herodotus never met Xerxes, but clearly Herodotus believes that, like other Eastern monarchs before him, Xerxes exhibits the dangerous pride which the Greeks referred to as hubris. Now, Herodotus describes two instances in particular in which Xerxes displays this hubris in offenses that he commits against nature. Xerxes first does this by ordering a canal to be cut through the Mount Athos Peninsula. And here on my map, you see the green lines indicating the route supposedly taken by Xerxes' army and navy during the invasion of 480. And you get a sense of where the Mount Athos Peninsula is. Now, in 492, a Persian fleet had been destroyed off the tip of Mount Athos. Here, it was a notoriously dangerous stretch of water, very stormy, and Xerxes does not want to take a chance on anything disrupting the operations of his fleet. So he actually orders a canal to be cut through the base of Mount Athos to provide a more sheltered way for his fleet to maintain a close proximity to the coast as it shadows the Persian army's main route of march. Now, for Herodotus and the Greeks, the cutting of a canal through the base of the peninsula was considered an act of hubris. The reasoning being that if the gods wanted a canal cut through Mount Athos, they would have put one there. It is not up to man to make these types of changes or alterations to the earth. So that is Xerxes' first offense against nature. Now, the second offense occurs, again, against nature, when the land army leaves Sardis and, marching northward, reaches the Hellespont, this channel of water that traditionally divided Europe from Asia. Today it is known as the Dardanelles. Xerxes orders the Hellespont, which is about a mile-wide channel of water, to be bridged. And Herodotus claims that 700 pontoon boats were lashed together, and then planking was laid down, and on top of the planking, dirt and brush was pounded into a type of causeway, which made it possible for the entire army to cross. Even fence posts were erected on either side of this bridge to prevent anybody from falling in or anything like that. And Herodotus depicts this as yet another violation against nature, because again, if the gods would have wanted the Hellespont to be accessible, they would have somehow made it so. So Xerxes again oversteps the boundaries of what human beings are allowed to do. And to compound this particular violation, when a storm destroys this first bridge, 2 bridges had to be built. The storm destroys the first one. Xerxes has the engineers in charge beheaded and orders the waters of the Hellespont to be whipped and shackles to be thrown into the Hellespont, symbolically punishing the Hellespont for its impudence. So again, you get this sense from Herodotus that Xerxes is quite full of himself, quite full of hubris, and this despotic behavior embedded within Xerxes' character could represent a type of fatal flaw. Now, looked at objectively, both the Mount Athos Canal and the bridging of the Hellespont represent remarkable feats of engineering, but again, Herodotus, probably under the influence of the genre of Greek tragedy, again, wants to heighten the drama of his characters. And so Xerxes is given these sort of negative characteristics of hubris, arrogance, that sort of thing. And the third offense that Herodotus describes in some detail against Xerxes refers to a Lydian nobleman named Pythios, who was thought to be the richest man in the world. And remember, Lydia was the area that the Persians had conquered in 546 BCE during the early reign of Cyrus. Well, Pythios offered to finance the entire invasion of Greece. Xerxes was delighted with this show of support, but he refused the offer. Now, subsequently, there was an ominous eclipse, and Pythios becomes quite frightened of this, and he feels like maybe he can go to Xerxes and request that the oldest of his 5 sons be left at home to comfort Pythios in his old age. And Pythios is okay with his younger sons accompanying Xerxes on the invasion, but he wants to leave the oldest at home. Now, Xerxes is absolutely infuriated by this implication that his expedition will somehow fail, and he has the son, the eldest son of Pythios, killed and has the boy's body cut in half, and he marches his army into Europe, crossing the Hellespont into Europe, between the 2 halves of this young man's mutilated body. So this is the adversary that the Greeks are going to be facing, and Herodotus uses both the size of Xerxes' army And his transgressions against geographic boundaries and the extravagance of his character and the brutality of his character to build the tension in his narrative. By the time the Persians approach Greece, it is clear that the danger is grave, and we are left to wonder, how will the Greeks ever be able to halt this juggernaut that is descending upon them? Now, another ominous factor I should mention is the fact that many Greek states, and those on the outer fringe of the Greek world, including Macedon, they will Medize. They will submit to Persian rule. Remember, the Greeks referred to the Persians as Medes. So to Medize is to submit or surrender to the Persian rule by offering the tokens of earth and water to the great king. And these Greek territories will agree that they will supply his army with food, fresh water, that sort of thing. And they certainly won't fight against the Persians. And some Greek states will actually supply contingents of warriors to the great king because they either were fearful or they had an ancient grudge against Athens. So, thanks to the treachery of the other Greeks, the way is now clear for the Persians to again move through Thrace into Macedon and southward into the region known as Thessaly. And now, further kind of heightening the tension is the fact that accompanying the Persians is a key advisor that exemplifies the treacherous behavior that many Greeks are guilty of. We have seen this before when Hippias, you may remember the deposed Athenian tyrant, had accompanied the Persians in their initial attempt to punish Athens back in 490 BCE. Now, this time around, accompanying Xerxes as a key advisor in the 480 invasion of Greece is Demaratus, one of the two kings of Sparta. Well, he and the other Spartan king had gotten into a big feud, and Demaratus was deposed as king in 491. He left Sparta and sought sanctuary at the court of the Persian king, and Darius, who was king at the time, gave him some small cities in northwestern Asia Minor to govern. Now, in 480, Xerxes recognized that Demaratus could be useful as a source of information about the Greeks, so he decided to bring Demaratus along with him, and Demaratus, of course, agreed. Back in Greece, the Spartans have recognized the seriousness of the situation and have called a meeting of all the Greek city-states that do want to resist this Persian invasion. And it's no surprise that it would be the Spartans that would take the lead on this, because Sparta was recognized as the preeminent military power in the Greek world, and if leadership was necessary, it would be the Spartans that would have to supply it. So the Spartans will initiate and ultimately succeed in forming an anti-Persian alliance of 31 Greek poleis. This will be called the Hellenic League because the Greeks refer to themselves as Hellenes. Now, this term Hellenic League is a modern label applied to this alliance. Now, it is important to note that, of course, 31 city-states represents only a small fraction of the total amount of city-states. But, of course, many Greek city-states, for reason of self-interest, chose to remain neutral or, again, chose to Medize, that is, to go over to the Persians. So, with this core group of 31 poleis, city-states, the Spartans take on the mantle of leadership and ultimately decide on a strategy of northern defense. And this is one of those key moments because many members of the Hellenic League, and indeed many Spartans themselves, favored a more conservative strategy of just fortifying the isthmus of Corinth and halt the Persian invasion there before it could enter into the Peloponnese, leaving Athens on its own. But there was a relatively progressive faction of Spartans, including one of the kings, Leonidas, who we'll meet in a moment, who recognized that sometimes it's better to fight the enemy when they are further away than when they're in your own backyard. So ultimately the Spartans decide to lead a forward defense well to the north of the Peloponnese. Now, of course, in preparation for the forming of any military plans, the oracle at Delphi had to be consulted. This was a standard policy in which the representative parties would send a delegation to Delphi to ask the god Apollo for guidance. And it was through the Pythia, the priestess of Apollo, who sat on a bronze tripod and would respond to the query of those seeking guidance. The priestess would respond with cryptic remarks, which would be translated by the priests who were on hand to transcribe what they thought she was saying. And oftentimes these oracles were very ambiguous and were open to interpretation. Well, in this case, the response is pretty clear-cut. The response that the Spartan delegation gets when asked about how they should go about resisting the Persians, here you can see the text that Herodotus has provided us. Hear your fate, O dwellers in Sparta. Either your famed great towns must be sacked, or the whole of Lacedaemon shall mourn the death of a king of the house of Heracles. Now, again, a reminder, the Spartans were thought to be descended from a group that sometime during the early phase of the Dark Age entered the Peloponnese. This group was called the Sons of Heracles because they were thought to be descended directly from Heracles, the great hero and god of the Greek pantheon. And so the Spartan kings were thought to be descended from Heracles. So this prophecy is relatively cut and dry. Either Sparta will be sacked by the Persians, or a Spartan king has to die. Now, the Spartan king chosen to lead the forward defense of Greece was Leonidas, and he decides that it is a necessary sacrifice, even if it is his own life that must be given. So, with the knowledge that he probably won't be coming back from this particular mission, Leonidas gathers about him his personal bodyguard of full Spartiates, each chosen because they had already had at least one son. And this is another indication that the Spartans who accompanied Leonidas figured that they probably were not coming back because they've left their replacement behind. But it's important to note that this was meant to be an advanced force, which was going to be a force made up of the 300 full Spartiates, about 900 helots, and 1,000 perioikoi, those autonomous but non-citizen inhabitants of Sparta. And they're also going to be joined by about 2,000 other Peloponnesians, drawn from various city-states in the Peloponnese, that had decided to join with the Spartans. So there would be a force of about 4,000 representing the Peloponnese in total that would embark on this northern march. And there was some debate over just how far north a northern defense should be. And initially, a force of about 10,000 from the collective city-states of the whole Hellenic League was sent north to the region of Thessaly, to an area called the Vale of Tempe, where there was a mountain pass, which could act as a sort of choke point, where Xerxes' vast army could be halted. But unfortunately, this pass could be flanked, meaning there was another way around it. So this Greek force dispersed, and some of the Greeks retreat south through Thessaly, and this force will meet up with the force marching north from the Peloponnese led by Leonidas. And both groups will ultimately meet at an area called the Hot Gates, the pass at Thermopylae. Now, it's important to note the Athenian participation at this stage of events. The Athenians are going to lead other naval contingents, and they planned on securing the Spartan flank, the Aegean flank, with a naval force that would prevent the Persian fleet from outflanking the Spartans. So this force, this naval force led by Athens and Themistocles, is going to fight against Xerxes' navy in several naval engagements while the land battle is being conducted. Now, these naval engagements are going to be occurring in the Artemisium Strait here. So the Greeks are firing on all cylinders by mobilizing their ground and naval assets with a level of cooperation that had never been seen before. In many ways, this, though, does represent the last best hope that the Greeks will have to turn away this invasion, because the pass at Thermopylae was a notorious choke point. It is a very narrow pass, and initially the Greeks thought that there was no way to flank it. Mount Keliodromos is the high mountain that gobbles up a lot of the space all the way almost to the sea. You probably have room for maybe 2 carts moving side by side to get through the pass. So it can be blocked. And with this force in place, the idea was to hold up the Persian advance while the other Greeks gathered reinforcements, and ideally this would mark the termination point of the Persian invasion if Greek resistance could hold the line. And so by late August of 480 BCE, the Persian army has finally reached Thermopylae. And Xerxes has been informed by his scouts that there is a group of Greeks that looks as if they are intent on obstructing his further progress. And this causes the Persians to pause for a moment and ponder how any sane person willingly could choose to stand up to the Persian juggernaut. And it is such a curiosity to Xerxes that he actually asked Demaratus about this. Remember, Demaratus was the exiled Spartan king who was advising Xerxes. So Xerxes asked Demaratus, what manner of man is this who is willing to obstruct this great force set against them? And Demaratus replies, the Greeks will bow down before no master, no king, but they are a slave to their laws. And this is especially so of the Spartans. If a Spartan force has been told to defend a position, then they will defend until the death. And this is exactly what Leonidas and the Greeks are intent on doing. Certainly, the Spartans are resigned to their fate and are determined to make a further Persian advance as costly as possible. And there is another story. There are quite a few stories told by Herodotus at this particular moment of his histories, that as the two sides confront one another, there's a 4-day waiting period where each side waits for something to happen. So, as a side note, there's already 4 days that are ticking by, and remember, time is of the essence. The Greek defenders are waiting for reinforcements. The rest of the Greeks have got to get their act together further south to determine what plan B is if the Persians force their way through the pass at Thermopylae. So every day does matter, and this is in many ways the value of the Spartan sacrifice. It buys the rest of the Greeks some time. So during this 4-day pause, while the two sides confront one another, there is a story Herodotus tells about Xerxes sending scouts to see what the Spartans are up to. And the scouts notice that the Spartans are nonchalantly combing their hair. And when the scouts report this back to Xerxes, and again Xerxes summons Demaratus, Demaratus informs Xerxes that this is an age-old custom of the Spartans, to comb their hair and neaten their overall appearance in preparation for a battle to the death. So, after this 4-day pause, the battle begins in earnest when the Persians try to force their way through the narrow pass. The Persians, who have tens of thousands of archers at their disposal, will prep the battle space by launching a massive shower of arrows at the Greek phalanx. Now, just before the arrows fly, one of the Spartans, Dionysius, when he is told how many archers the Persians have and that their arrows will block out the sun, Dionysius, in typical Spartan fashion, responds, "Well, this is very good news, for if the Persians obscured the light of the sun, the battle against them would actually be in the shade and not in the sun." But all of this gallows humor cannot hide the fact that the Spartans and the other Greeks who are defending the pass have a very grim task before them. And for 2 days the battle is a stalemate, and Herodotus reports that the Greeks kill a huge number of Persians who are attempting to more or less steamroll their way through, but the Spartans and the other Greeks are not budging. So these frontal assaults are very costly to the Persians. Indeed, we must remember that the hoplite phalanx is tailor-made for such a battle. And so frustration builds in the Persian camp, and it could have perhaps caused a change in the Persian plan. But the ever-present threat of Greek treachery once again raises its head in the form of a local shepherd named Ephialtes, who decides for various motivations, probably to enrich himself or ingratiate himself with the Persians. Well, Ephialtes decides to aid the Persians by showing them a path, a little-known shepherd's path, by which the Spartan and Greek position in the pass at Thermopylae could be flanked. And here, this image gives you some idea of the path, going up Mount Kaliadromos and then down around into the pass itself behind the Spartan position. And on the 3rd day of the battle, the Persians move a force by night along this pathway, and as the sun rises, the Spartans and the remaining Greeks find themselves outflanked and now surrounded. Fortunately for some of the Greeks, Leonidas had gotten word prior to dawn that the Persians were involved in a flanking maneuver, and he orders many of the remaining Greek defenders to retreat before they are entirely cut off. But Leonidas and the remaining Spartan warriors and about 1,900 other Greeks volunteered to stay and put up the best resistance that they could. And so on the famous 3rd day of the battle, Herodotus paints what happens in Homeric terms, in the sense that these Greek heroes, against insurmountable odds, go down fighting. And the high point of the battle on the 3rd day is when Leonidas himself is killed, and there is an epic battle over the recovery of his body. Indeed, this was a feature of Homeric combat, that when a hero had fallen, his comrades would move heaven and earth to recover that body. And Herodotus reports that's exactly what Leonidas's remaining Spartan comrades did. They did recover the body, but shortly thereafter they are all killed, despite, as Herodotus reports, fighting with their spears, their swords, rocks, and then finally with their teeth. So a very tenacious defense all the way to the very end. And the Greeks themselves recognized that although this will be considered a catastrophic defeat, because now the Persian advance into southern Greece and the Attic Peninsula and Athens is open and free, but there was more to it than that. There was a sense among the Greeks that something special had happened at Thermopylae, that this band of warriors had given their all to defend something larger than themselves. And later, when it came time to commemorate their sacrifice, a monument was constructed, and the poet Simonides was enlisted to write a suitable inscription to memorialize the bravery and the sacrifice of the Spartans. Simonides emulated the laconic manner in which the Spartans spoke, and his inscription reads as follows: "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie."